right, welcome back to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club and weekly podcast where we play games and brew good conversations together. I'm your host, Jenny Wyndham.
And I'm your all-brother, Joel Thomas.
Oh, dang.
All
wow.
brother?
We're going for a patriarchy now here?
Well, I'm not all father. I'm all brother. There were no brothers. I'm your all brother right now. That's what I got for you.
Nice. Well, Hecky Allbro, I guess.
Hecky Allbro. Hecky Allbro sounds like the perfect spin-off, like, dating sim for this game.
Oh my gosh. Welcome, everybody. We have been playing throughout the month of June 1000xRESIST, which is no doubts about it, my favorite game of the year. I will not be hiding that sentiment. I think this game has been an absolute joy to play all month, and this is a spoiler cast. So every week we've been going episodically through each chapter of the game or groups of chapters, and today is our final episode covering this game. Now, we do have a special conversation with the developers that's releasing next week, so we're not going to be totally done, but as far as spoiler cast discussion of like the direct contents of the game, this is it. This is the final countdown. We are here.
I am a little sad. I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm a little sad that this is our we have a monthly hangout, which is going to be amazing, but I feel like we're coming to the end of our discussion time around this game. And it's like, I have been fed by this in the same way that, like, obligatory Lost reference, when Lost was still on, like, talking to my friends about my theories and ideas and questions. That's like, I feel that energy right now with this game, and I'm gonna miss it, man. There's been so much to dig into.
Yeah, I was thinking, and actually in my game journal, as I was reflecting on the process of playing this game, the one thing I wrote down that I wanted to bring and share was that I do wish we had I known this game would have had the impact on me it did, selfishly, as well as I think folks in the community, folks who've been emailing saying how this game has made them think about things. I wish I had just said this was going to be a 2-month game and we are just going to take it literally chapter by chapter instead of in these group chapters that I did. I did not anticipate the game having so many layers to really dig into, and truthfully, this is maybe, I feel like I've maybe mentioned this before, but genuinely, this is a game where I could see maybe in a year or two, I would love to revisit as a community. I don't know if that's cheating. I don't know if that'd be of any interest, but this idea of also being able to revisit a game, and especially one that was made so specifically within this time and that we are processing and living, I feel like we almost need even more distance to be able to fully appreciate and be able to reflect in ways that I don't think is possible right now on this game, to be very honest.
That's a really interesting point. I love this idea. We're brainstorming for you all podcast ideas for the future that we're going to be exploring. But man, yeah, like, there's just so much to dig into. Every week we finish talking and it's like, oh, we didn't talk about that one really important thing. And as you mentioned, and as I'm sure we'll discuss, it's like, there is so clearly more to explore here, especially having made it through the end of this game. It's like, I know there's subtext and there are things happening here that I am missing, that I want to go back and find.
Yes. So if you've been with us on this whole journey, thank you. 6 to 1. Thank you for being a part of it. As always, if you are listening to this podcast on Spotify, please consider leaving a star rating. It helps us out. If you're listening on YouTube, leaving a like, a comment, following the channel, that's always, again, just a really nice little boost playing the whole algorithm game. And also hopefully to share this with other folks who are also interested in more thorough discussion, sort of deeper discussion on a game, and really savoring it and taking it apart.
That's a great point. Just real quick, the idea of like recommending this to other people, I feel like last year with Space of the Unbound, I saw so many folks that were like telling their friends about that game and like getting the word out. That is this game for me this year, that like I'm telling all my friends about it, whether they play video games or don't. So like if there were ever one to like start plugging a game for, like I'd make it this one.
Honestly, I've purchased this game now three times. 4 times including myself, but I purchased the game 3 separate times for 3 other friends who as I was been playing, I'm just like, I just can't help but think of you specifically. I think you should play this game. 2 of them are not what I would consider like very active players of games. Like I had to ask, I was like, do you have a laptop like that you use regularly? Do you even have a Switch? Like what do you play on? And yeah, I have a couple more people I think I'll be getting this game for because I do think it's that good. I think it transcends like so many games. I think many games are beyond like I think everyone should play, but this one is accessible in a way I think that people who don't play games can appreciate. So yeah, oh, but before we get into our full spoiler discussion of the finale, let's head off to the pastry case. We got a little bit of a special edition because it's the end of the month. So I thought, why not take some time in this pastry case to focus in on not the industry news, but Geeks and Grounds news and what we're going to be playing for the month of July. So next month's game is actually a community voted title. At the end of the year last year in December, we did a ranked choice vote where folks got to nominate the games that they were interested in playing with the community in discussing. We had a ranked choice vote and 6 games were selected, and Citizen Sleeper was one of those winners. And I'm so excited because we're going to be playing it, and it's my birthday month, and so I'm very excited because Citizen Sleeper is a game that I got to enjoy when it released, and I've been wanting to replay it. So yeah, it's going to be great. Did you want to read the Steam description, Joel?
Of course. Citizen Sleeper, role-playing in the ruins of interplanetary capitalism. Live the life of an escaped worker washed up on a lawless station at the edge of an interstellar society. Inspired by the flexibility and freedom of TTRPGs, explore the station, choose your friends, escape your past, and change your future. It's coming from developer Jump Over the Age and publisher Fellow Traveler.
Which we love. Fellow Traveler. They were also the publisher for 1000xRESIST. So, you know, they curate very good, very narratively, I think, engaging titles. So if you are a fan of narrative games, check out their full catalog. Citizen Sleeper. Have you heard of this or played this yet, Joel?
Haven't played it. I do remember hearing about it during the voting, seeing it from the community and going through it, and I remember being blown away by like the character design and like sci-fi elements of this. And I'm back on the Steam page now, and I'm just so glad that we are playing this game because I was like, is one that I was really intrigued by, but just couldn't get around to last winter.
Yeah, I think this will be really, really fun. For folks who are familiar with the game, you may know that there are some DLC, I would say, I don't know, episodes out. I think there are 3 DLC chapters or episodes called Flux, Refuge, and Purge. I don't think we'll have time to include them in this month. If you want to play those, please do, and you can bring them into your discussion. But as a sort of core community like goal, we're just going to be playing the main game. But I just wanted to highlight there is DLC. So if you're playing it and you're really trucking through and you're excited, you want more, there's more. So don't fear. And honestly, if you do get to play more, I would love to hear what those DLCs are like. You can bring them into discussion. That'll be really fun. Just some of the themes that we'll be talking about that I'm really looking forward to. Cyberpunk, you mentioned like the sci-fi aesthetic. This is a cyberpunk game, and I would love to talk about cyberpunk as a genre because I think oftentimes we think of the neons, we think of Blade Runner, we think of certain aesthetic choices that a lot of cyberpunk takes, but I think there are thematic elements that are a bit more fundamental than just neon to the genre. And some of the tropes that cyberpunk has that I'm excited to explore to see what Citizen Sleeper embraces, what it lets go of, what it takes and expands upon. Obviously capitalism, We're going to be talking about capitalism again, and labor and value in society and what happens when you exist within a capitalistic society. And one thing that I think is going to be really interesting, especially considering we actually played a game that touched on this in a very different way earlier with Hyper Light Drifter, is the idea of disability in terms of game mechanics, game narratives, and what it can look like. So
Cool.
yeah, it's going to be a very good month. So if you are interested and you haven't yet subscribed to the newsletter, go to geeksandgrounds.com. That's where you can subscribe. Those newsletters go out every Wednesday is the goal. I would say 95% of the time we get there. So that way it has the most recent podcast, sort of recapping the last week, as well as the reflection question for this following week and any supplementary materials to help enhance your understanding. Yeah, I think that's it. Anything you wanted to add about Citizen Sleeper?
Just that I'm pumped for it, and I'm appreciative of the community for making it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I think I'm very, very excited to see the conversations, especially, again, what's been really exciting is seeing the cumulative effect of the games that we play. And so I think, especially coming off of 1000xRESIST, I'm really interested to see what kind of conversations we have about Citizen Sleeper.
Yes.
So this month's brew. As we know, Citizen Sleeper, we ended last week at the conclusion of Chapter 8, where Watcher has passed away, and all of the orchard and beyond, even the other side, the Jows, the miscellaneous, all of the sisters, they're coming together in this one area of the station to talk about what to do in terms of principle and society and what their next step should be. We are at a peak moment in the game. Gosh, where do we even begin, I guess, is my question.
I think it's important for us to also let the audience know. Jenny and I have figured out this entire game. We have no questions remaining.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is going to get wrapped up with a little bow on it. So there will be no curiosity by the time we're done today.
Yeah, no curiosity here, no questions, only facts and statements that are definitive.
Can I begin with a question?
Oh my gosh, please do.
So you, like Jenny mentioned, we open up and you're in what looks to be a train station. If you'll recall where we left off, the train had broken down. We're going to walk the tracks. We appear to be in a train station. We meet these other factions are all assembled there. Is this train station the other side? Is it the other side?
I didn't even think about that. But when you're asking this, I don't think so.
Do you know what the other side is?
No.
Okay.
And that was one of my questions, because we're jumping ahead a little bit, but we do see a diagram of the orchard. Like one of the big reveals that we finally learn is the orchard is actually this ship-like machine that is able to go up and down what seems to be on this sort of mechanical system. So it's not like a free floating ship that's just like swimming about the ocean. This is a ship that's just like been able to descend, kind of like a mine cart shaft thing, and then it can come back up. And so I'm like, the other side has to exist within the confines of that, but I don't think we've seen it, because frankly I feel like we would have seen like more Zhaos or something.
This was exactly my question. So like you show up and you see people that we've already engaged with. So there's like,
well, I think you're moving ahead, because before we see all the folks, don't we get the
the military,
the big military flashback?
You're right.
What are timelines, though?
We're
just following the structure of the game, and we're gonna hop back and forth. It's fine.
Good for us.
Yeah.
Yes. So you get off the train, and it's just you and the core like old school sisters that are there. Yes. So BBF and Healer and Fixer, because Watcher actually you left behind, right? So we show up to this train station, and like, first of all, this next section was one of the spookiest sections of the whole game for me.
Mm-hmm.
You walk in and there are dead military bodies all over. And your task in the game is to find the body that has the clearance to open doors for you and make things happen.
Right. I think it's Jasper is the name. Jasper the 50. That's what we're
Jasper the
looking for.
50.
Yeah.
And the way that we do that is by hopping back and forth through time using CCTV footage is kind of the way that it's explained to you. So like you're
Mm-hmm.
not navigating memories like we have been, but you walk through and you see like light up versions of the military and you talk with them to learn about their experiences. Military is
Mm-hmm.
maybe even the wrong word, the 50, whatever these militant
No,
folks
I
are.
very much I wrote military industrial complex question mark in my notes here because I have questions about what the 50 is and what it represents. So there's a whole thing there. But yes,
Yeah,
continue.
no, I think that's great. So like as you're going through, you are finally getting some more answers about the 50 and its groups, and then eventually you learn about some horrific things that happen as a part of the 50. But maybe before we get to the like horrific parts, like what were some of the big things that we learned during this section of the game? Some things that
Oh
stood out to
man.
you. Like for me, it was first of all, there is a central command that the orchard is not
Hmm.
like, even though that's where Iris lives, that is not the central command of all of these different locations. That there is somewhere else that is giving the orders. That to me
Hmm.
felt surprising.
Hmm. I I had kind of assumed there was because in my head the we had already gotten clues and moments in the story where we knew the orchard wasn't the only station in which stuff was happening. So I was hearing about the central command wasn't as surprising to me, but I think what I had assumed was that this military presence was also Canadian. In my head, I had assumed that. But then when we talk, and I think, I don't know if it was revealed sooner, but I think this is the first time I realized that they, Mimi had a comment to Johnson, I think that was like, well, weren't you from Toronto? And it, for whatever reason, it implied to me that they were not from Toronto first, but then like that maybe they were from the US. And then I started thinking like, well, was the 50 like 50 states? Is this like the 50 like was does this military entity come from like North America, but this is from the US
Hmm.
and maybe it's a coalition because they also talk about, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping everywhere, but this is the way the game works. They also talk about um, as they're descending, the cities that they're targeting for a shelling operation, where essentially they're sacrificing cities to distract the occupants as they are going down. And the cities that they name are predominantly US cities. And so in my
Mm-hmm.
head, I'm thinking, it was just something I hadn't realized before and I hadn't even put together because in my head I was like, this is a game that's set in Canada. Everything's in Canada. So it added a layer of globalization to this that I wasn't anticipating, and also just another foil of like, what is like, why would the US military play such a hefty role in this? And like, what does that say about everything else in the game? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, now that's where I'll stop and I'll
Let's
let you
hang out
hop
on
in.
that point though, because the idea, so you mentioned that they're bombing population centers. So they've essentially said
Mm-hmm.
like to cover your descent, and the descent, like a lot of these stations, the 50 stations, are
Right.
about to descend. They're going kind of underground or underwater. And kind of to cover that, they are bombing the most densely populated areas because
Mm-hmm.
the the keepers, the occupants, now that we know call themselves the keepers, uh, are maybe attracted to suffering. There's some
Yes.
sort of connection that humans have put together that they are drawn to suffering, and
Yeah.
that was something that felt like really important to me at the time, but I couldn't figure out why it felt important. And then
Mm-hmm.
later we kind of get some answers about that. But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing that I had I think pointed out last time, I can't remember, but we had heard conversations about from Iris about youngest when she's talking to secretary, I think in chapter 8, where she talks about how she doesn't want the occupants or the keepers to get a hold of the youngest or to get a hold of the other sisters. And so I started putting together the connection of, okay, something about this element of suffering perhaps has to do with the way that Iris is communing or conversing with the occupants and trying to protect the sisters from this element of suffering that seems to be tied with the connection to the occupants. Again, no answers from me at the moment. It's just these disparate dots that seem to continue to connect and circle around each other, and eventually I'm sure they'll mean something more to me.
So I'm going to tell you a false statement, a question that I asked and statement that I thought of during the section of the game that I think gets disproven later. But this is the group that is perfecting cloning technology. During this time, we learned that they learn how to implant memories and develop kind of like fully aged clones. So we learn a little bit about that during this sequence. And the thing that stood out to me was, what if immunity isn't genetic at all? And maybe like we already know that like these clones are not genetic. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Like if they're perfect clones, then if they're genetically the same, they should have the immunity. At this point in the game, we believe that Principal is making clones of herself, but and we also believe at this point in the game that the eldest sisters, the original sisters, died of the disease. That was like the flashback that Principal showed us, was like each of the sisters one by one fell to the disease. Principal somehow doesn't. And so my question as I wrote this was like, oh wow, we were told in that flashback that Almo took away the cure. And my question was, what if the cure isn't genetic at all? What if it specifically has to do with the keeper's connection to people, a specific people or people? I now know that this is wrong, but I just want to say that like I was just this is like, again, speaks to how this game really subverts expectations over and over and over again. And you really can't take anything for granted, because when you're seeing these memories, when you're playing these different characters, oftentimes you're playing through someone's modification of those memories. And I just felt like this was kind of the culminating moment for me where that really hit home.
Yeah, and that's the thing I kept having to remind myself, is that these memories, even the very first ones, like I have to remind myself that they were modified, and like even the like seeing Fixer way back at the beginning was not Fixer.
Not real.
And I think that's something I keep having, I keep forgetting as I get into the story, and then I keep having to remind myself to question a little bit more as we are experiencing a lot of these. Yes,
another important finding, they are also trying to make it so the clones can conceive and give birth. They have one that makes it to the third trimester. And then there's this conversation that we overhear where Johnson, who was the leader of the 50 in this particular branch, refuses to try and impregnate original Iris, like does not want that to happen. And first of all, I think that raises some very interesting ethical questions that like, what's the difference between Iris and these clones? Like these clones are just as conscious, have just as much free will. And yet you're comfortable like using their bodies for this type of experimentation as clones, but not the original. It just kind of speaks to the real bad ethics behind the military operation here.
For sure. Well, and you have, I believe it's Mimi the 50th, who even is very much like, I mean, we haven't tried inseminating Iris. Like, why don't we just go forward and do that? Because we have to exhaust every single option. And it's this mentality of like the ends justifying the means, which we see touches of in other characters. But I think with Mimi, it felt, for whatever reason, to me, just much more stark and cold and like cruel in a lot of ways that I had felt maybe to differing degrees, maybe looking at other characters and some of the ways they were interacting with one another in this game. The crew unraveling throughout these flashbacks was also the next big learning. We learned that being isolated down underground 1,000 meters or something like something deep in the ground underwater, they are starting to turn on one another. They are suspicious of one another. They're gossiping about one another. There's a section where they're talking about Mimi and Iris getting way too close, and there's like something happening there between both of them. And we hear about Iris stabbing Mimi, and she's in critical condition. So we know something went down between the two of them. Did you want to add any thoughts
just
on
that relationship with Mimi, like you watch it kind of unfold, that like she's standing up for her, and then she's kind of like goes through this whole cycle. And I thought that the Mimi story was one of the things that really grounded this whole section of the game.
Well, and it's a very good, I think, parallel line, especially to Fixer and Watcher, to even Principal and Almo, in a lot of ways. And so we see these women, you know, getting close to one another. We have like the friends to like lovers to enemies again and again and again. And with a less, like a different type of relationship, but you kind of see it mirrored in Iris and her mom as well, where they like love each other, but by the end, like their departure from one another is one of anger, you know. And and later we're going to talk about a conversation that Iris Almo has with her mom, and it just like it ripped my heart. It was so good, but so intense to read. So
essentially, I think we've talked a bit about what we're leading up to here. Like there's a coup that happens among the 50 here. They've lost, central command goes down. There's no like upper level of authority they're relying on, and eventually there is a mass shooting among the 50, and all of this is playing out as they're making the decision to try and ascend and come back up, and just so many things go wrong. Is it Mimi? Is she the one who ends up taking her own life? And Amelia
does.
Another keeper kind of jumps from the rafters and takes her own life. And then the horror of horrors, as they are ascending, the occupants come and end up killing the rest of the 50 that are there. What was your take on that whole exchange and experience?
Oh man, I will admit I played this on a plane ride. It was like a red-eye flight, so I was already a bit tired and delirious, and I just couldn't stop playing. So while this whole game feels like a fever dream, this chapter in particular felt very just like out of body in a lot of ways. I think for me, what I really grabbed onto was the despair of the crew, like, and how much it had overtaken them, that occupant was drawn to show up in their quarters.
I didn't even catch that, Jenny. I was just like, they started going up, and so occupants show. I didn't even connect the dots that, like, no, these people are in extreme suffering right now, and that kind of summoned them, which we learned earlier in that section, and we had already talked about today. Oh, that's so good. That's so good.
Good and like so tragic. I think for me it reinforced this idea that the occupants feed on this really hyper negative emotion and trauma. And it got me thinking also about this idea of cycles, where sometimes I wonder about games coming from especially marginalized voices. Like I often will consume media that's like about especially like mixed race sort of struggles for personal example. And there's a fine line between consuming something that validates your experience and allows other people to understand and empathize and sympathize with what happens and what's going on, versus like sitting in trauma and not moving out of it or not trying to find a pathway away. And so for me, this was on top of the train tracks, on top of everything. It's like, how much are we sitting in trauma and how much are we trying to learn from it and move forward, which is like the phrase that we're going to see come
Ugh.
through a lot today.
Over and over again. And it's also interesting is like there's so much that happens in this last like couple chapters and epilogue, but it
Mm-hmm.
goes so fast. Like to me, this is the fastest playing part of the whole game, which
Oh,
I think
yeah.
again speaks to the quality of pacing here that's happening. So yeah, we make it through the occupants piece. We get access, and now what I referenced earlier, out of sequence, there are representatives from every faction now at the station with you. So you have the Zhaos there. You have a contingency of the kind of weirdly religious sect that still worships Almo. You
Mm-hmm.
have some of the older sisters that are there. What was your take? Because essentially what happens is you walk around and you get to interact with each of these groups and basically explicitly hear from them what their motivations are. What were some
Mm-hmm.
of your experiences during this that like really stood out to you?
Um, Getting to apologize to the Zhaos, even through the persona of Blue, that felt like so cathartic to me in a way that I did
Yes.
not anticipate. Like, I don't know why it felt so cathartic, but it did. It felt really good to have the choice to tell the Zhaos that we're sorry for what has been done to them through all of the generations of irises. Um, and I saw that there was an option to not do anything, and I'm very curious to know what happens if that is selected. But I almost don't even want to, like, it's almost an Undertale situation at this point where I'm like, I don't know if I could play and not
Hmm.
apologize to the shells. Like,
That's a
I don't know
really
if I
good
could.
point. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
You also get the like what I would consider one of the best lines of the whole, and there were so many great lines in this ending. But the Zhaos have a line here that says, "You Iris types don't even know your own capacity for cruelty."
Hmm.
Oh, like yeah, that's an Iris thing. But when I extrapolate that to like kind of how Iris represents parts of our experiences as people, I was like, man, like
Hmm.
she's our representative to the keepers, and she doesn't recognize her own capacity for cruelty. And I was like, that must so inform how the keepers understand humanity and humans. And it just like
Hmm.
really stood out to me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is a great moment. I think also another great Zhao line, much more succinct, but actions over words. She's like, actions over words, Blue. Um, and that was a line that stuck with me through the end. By the time when we have to make certain choices, uh, that rung throughout my head
Mm-hmm.
when I was making my final choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's worth calling out that this point where we're talking to every faction before the big conflict, is a
Hmm.
perfect mirror for what's going to happen at the end of the game, where you talk to factions or representative ideas of these factions again.
Right.
So just a beautiful bit of symmetry and parallelism in this moment too.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it does start setting you up to appreciate the choices that you're going to have to make
Hmm.
in a very, very good way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we talked to all of them, and I think each faction you're kind of getting what you expect in terms of like what their motivation is. I did notice that Chris, representing the what were they
The
the
miscellaneous.
miscellaneous, thank you, has an umbrella, which is something that we've talked about kind of the
Hmm.
symbolism of throughout this game. So I thought that was really
Yep.
interesting. Any other big parts before we get to the dramatic conclusion of this chapter?
Oh man. I don't think so. So yeah, keep us going on this train ride.
Yeah, so we kind of cut to a vision of the orchard, and we're like, oh, okay, we're back in the orchard again. I wonder whose perspective we are. And then you look up, and the ceiling of the orchard is breaking, and we see our
Wait, oh, you
characters
missed
falling.
the principal's monologue.
Oh,
Do you remember,
please.
did you take any notes on that? It's such a beautiful moment. And this was the part where genuinely I didn't know what to make of it other than it's a moment we get with Principal that we have not seen her side of the story in a very long time. I feel like we have been very watcher centric, we have been very blue centric. We have seen Principal as the enemy this whole time. And this is the first time we have the opportunity where we see scenes of Principal remembering these key moments that we've been living through as these other characters, the ascent to power, the explosion at the play, realizing, and remembering disappointments and fears and hopes. And so I think that was just a really touching opportunity to humanize Principal. I think that I just didn't want to miss out shouting out that I thought it was a
That
really
is,
good scene.
I'm glad you called that out, because I didn't even write down a note about that happening, because for me, it did not, like, I didn't have any of that emotional resonance at this
You
point.
didn't?
Because,
Oh
no,
my
because I
gosh.
felt like we've been seeing this from her perspective all along. Like,
Really?
all the communions that we've
Oh
gone
wow.
through, all of
That's fair,
the
yeah.
way she's kind of taken over, like, I have felt like we've
Mm-hmm.
only been getting her perspective on things, and twisted at that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so funny that you found an emotional resonance with this, because I was just like, yeah, sorry, like, yeah, you're a fascist who's been doing all this really shitty stuff, and now things are hard, like.
Damn, now I'm very interested to hear about your choices in the end. because because there's like, I think what struck me most about the scene with Principal, um and it doesn't excuse her actions, but it just showed a side of her that, it was seeing her almost as youngest again instead of just Principal, and like seeing how there was a moment where she was looking over the balcony at Fixer and at Watcher, and I think she saw in them that love that she had for like Alma way back in the day, and the betrayal. And so I think that there was just it was it's gray, right? The entire thing is just like so murky because you
Hmm.
know exactly what you're fighting against, and Principle stands for all of that. But at the same time, it's like Principle is you. Like you are, like everyone is everyone. I don't know. I don't it's good.
Everyone is everyone, and that's the
That's
name
what
of
I'm
this episode.
saying. Like God.
Oh no, that's really good. I'm glad that you called that out, because it recolors that experience for me, because
Mm,
I am very much a, like, once a character has crossed a certain threshold for me, there's no
mhm.
redemption that I'm going to be allowing them. And it's very good to have a reminder that it's like, from
Interesting.
a narrative perspective, even if you don't buy into it, it's important that that happens, so that as
Yeah.
you're making decisions as that are to come, there's more gravitas to it, and it makes it feel more real and grounded.
Yeah, and I will shout out one quote that I wrote down from Principal because it reminded me, and it mirrors Iris's mother, Clara. She said, "I dream of places I've never been, of people I've never seen, and sensations I've never had." And so again, we're seeing this repetition of sleepwalking,
Mm-hmm.
of longing and yearning for something that she hasn't even experienced and can't even vocalize, but she just knows she is hoping for it and craving it somehow.
It is, I just turned the page in my notebook to the top of chapter 10, which is glass breaking flashback to the youngest.
Yep.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is where there are some major assumptions that get spoiled here, or changed here, that I had been
Yeah.
making. Um, So first of all, I just got to say, like, we haven't talked a ton about this art style, which we learned a little bit about lighting and things like that that matter, but the imagery at the top of chapter 10 when we see the glass breaking kind of for the second time is
Right.
gorgeous. Like the light being refracted in each shard of glass,
Mm-hmm.
man, like it was like the most stunning. It was like, this should be like a high res backtop image on my laptop. It looks so cool. So what were some of the things, like, so we get this whole flashback series for the youngest, for Principal. um
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I'll say, the thing that like struck me the hardest was, I think this is where you learn uh that she is still immune, and
Mm-hmm.
that this is kind of bursting my previous thing that I had written down from the previous chapter, where it's like, oh, we saw in the early flashbacks, the tampered with flashbacks, that Almo took away the original sister's immunity.
Right.
And what we see in this moment is, no, that's not what happened. The original sisters would still have their immunity if they were still alive. Principal's the only original that's still alive. She's still immune, and she has started wearing the mask so that she could perpetuate this propaganda that
Mm-hmm.
Almo took away
Mm-hmm.
immunity. To me, that was one of the most insidious story points of this whole section.
I had suspicions because I don't know why, but for some reason, I feel like I had noted that like there was one part where there was like a mask off moment, and maybe this was it. But yeah, I was just like, I feel like I wasn't surprised, but I was like, like just I was like, I had a feeling. I had a feeling. I didn't predict it exactly, but I was like, there's something suspicious here.
You're so plugged in. I was certainly not. I was like, you dirty bird. There's also in like a flash here where you're getting during this flashback that the principal is kind of dealing with the same thing that our boy Jack in Lost was dealing with, where you're among them but you're not one of them. And that
Mm-hmm.
when she was youngest and she was Watcher, and even as Principal, she never gets to be one of the sisters. She
Mm-hmm.
is in this elevated or isolated position, and I think there's an interesting degree of maybe loneliness that I think comes through in that moment, that I did think was a really interesting point to anchor on.
Mm-hmm.
So, were there any other important moments in this kind of like flashback sequence that stood out to you?
Um, I don't think so. I'm looking, I feel like my notes maybe are somehow out of order. Is this before or after the ascent, the timed ascent? This is before?
The timed ascent. Oh, this is before. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay.
So
Yeah,
glass
I don't have
breaks,
anything. Yeah, I don't have anything
flashback,
to add.
and then we get like there's this kind of cut, and the way that I wrote this was, we get uh, a quick sense of what has been happening in the orchard since we left, since the train left.
Mhm. Mhm.
And some of the big things set up, one, there appears to be some sort of uprising happening in the little like fake town
Mhm.
among the miscellaneous. You have what looked to be a miscellaneous that was self-immolating in front of the entry to the orchard.
Mhm.
And the Zhaos have stopped working, that they're withholding their labor. And so to me, it's just kind of like seeing the call out of some of these like well-known protest
Mhm.
approaches being represented in the game here. I thought was a really cool thing to see, that like these folks have
Mhm.
no concept of, they don't have history. They haven't seen protest, and so the fact that we're seeing this happen among these people as like, this is the natural response to this oppression, I thought was just a
Mhm.
really interesting
Mm.
moment.
Yeah, that's a really, really good call out. I think this is when we see the Capital Red that we've met way back in earlier chapters right before the play. sort of coming up to the older sisters, or I guess the function sisters, I guess, for lack
Sure.
of a better
Function
word.
sisters. I like that. We'll use
Function
that.
sisters.
The function sisters.
Yeah. And, the Capital Red is, trying to, get them to stop, say, hey, I see what you're doing. Bang Bang Fire is like trying to hold down the fort. And this is the moment where this is where I started just pressing like go, go, go with the text, because I was like, I need to know what happens, because Bang Bang Fire gets shot by Capital Red. And so we don't know. I don't think at this point we don't know exactly what Bang Bang's status is. We just know it is time to move forward with this plan of getting that mass communion set up, which I don't think we've like really illustrated. In the last episode, even, we didn't talk about sort of this plan that they have in terms of mass communion. Watcher's like dying plan was to reunite the three familiars, which interestingly enough are red, blue, and sort of a golden yellow, three very key colors in this game. And using those three familiars at the same time, do a mass communion where everyone, all irises, all Zhaos, everyone in the orchard and the other side will be able to see the true memories of not only All Mother, but of Iris's mother, of grandmother, beyond generations. And with that information, decide how to move forward. So this is like the culmination of that. We are beginning this movement towards the big communion.
Oh. So much happens in this next chunk. Yeah, so Capital Red, who is mauve, and does not like being called that, comes out. Mm-hmm. The ceiling breaks, and it's like, we have to do the communion as we are falling from the ceiling. And so the next thing that you were just referencing is we go to this kind of mental subspace again, and you have to climb using kind of the yellow zip line things to the top of this area in under 5 minutes. First question, what was your experience like with this part of the game? Like, this felt very much like, oh, I'm playing a video game right now to me. How did you feel during this?
Yeah, I mean, this was the most video gamey moment of the game, I would say. Like, the most overtly, you have a timer that gives you a pretty generous, I would say, 5 minutes counting down, but seeing the timer going down just adds that sense of urgency. You're not going to be looking around. You need to find like the occupant keeper nodes to like as quickly as you can ascend. Secretary is at the top of this memory liminal space, and you're supposed to be meeting Secretary to complete this like communal transfer. I don't know.
I have a question for you, because I know that you paid a lot more attention to the orchard than I did and spent more time there. As you are ascending, there is a wall that has greenery on it and a giant skeleton, like what looks like a giant backbone.
Like a spine, yeah.
Is that in the orchard and I just never noticed it?
Yes, it is in the orchard. I'm trying to remember where it is by. Admittedly, my sense of direction in the orchard wasn't greatest, but I do know it's in the orchard for sure.
Do we know what it is? Is that just like we're going to put this skeleton here to mess with the clones?
It's one of the major questions I have. I'm like, why is there a skeleton here? I'm not entirely sure.
Why Skelly, though? Why Skelly?
Yeah, but it's cool. Like, this ascent, you like go through these disparate broken chunks of the orchard. So like at one point you're running through the bar, you run past the skelly spine, you're like running up, there's a sort of a pathway that goes over the garden, but it's like this sort of illuminated arch corridor. You run through BB Fire's office room area. Right, so like you're going through all of these spaces that, once again, we're playing with this idea of familiarity, but now it's been reshaped and reformed, and it's very distinctly unfamiliar at the same time, which is such a cool feeling.
It was brilliant. Because there's so much to learn from the narration, from the dialogue in these last 3 chapters. And I think having a break to be like, mentally you don't have to learn anything right now, but we are going to give you something to like physically grasp onto, I thought was just such a great, like, pacing wise, a brilliant move by the creators in this moment.
Yeah, and I will admit, I didn't totally pay attention because I was, again, much more embedded in like the urgent, got to get to the end before the timer runs out because I
Yeah,
didn't know how long it would take. But I think if I'm remembering correctly, the voiceover does repeat like key quotes from
that's
various carriers
right.
as you're running up. So you're getting the reinforcement of a lot of these ideas, a lot of the characters' motivations and themes, like sort of highlight reel coming through as you're running up this sort of, again, it's not really stairs, the the memory space.
Brilliant. And I think like an excellent transition, because you get to the front or you get to the top,
Mm-hmm.
and Secretary is there, and you get one of the most unique playing experiences of the game, like very different than everything else we've experienced at the next section. Because once you
Mm-hmm.
touch Secretary, you go into a new liminal space
Yep.
as Secretary. So we've played around with
Yeah.
shifting perspectives before, but we are now the familiar. We are this kind of alien technology that is floating around a different type of liminal space. It reminded me of like
Mm-hmm.
a modern art museum. I don't know how you would describe the setting of this part.
It felt like like a set, like an empty warehouse TV set.
Yes.
Like to me, or like a theater set, but more like when you're like, I've been on like video shoots, for example, like for different dance things, and it reminded me of like warehouses that we would set up shop in to film
Mm,
like portions of a video shoot. And I think you even see at the very start, and you kind of circle around at the end, there's like sort of this like the white backdrop, like the paper that they'll like put down
yeah.
almost, and the and lights, and none of it's on, it's very abandoned, but it feels like you are on a set of a show or something
Yeah, that
to
is
me.
brilliant. And yeah, there's like can lights, right? That are like
Right.
projecting light on things. I'm glad you said that, because that really colors my experience there now.
Yeah, so what happens? We teleport, we are secretary. Who do we see when we're there?
You are, instead of like hunting down Zhao or hunting down and trying to get to the next iris,
Mhm.
you are trying to make it to an occupant, a keeper, and this is a keeper called the Source. And this was game shattering for me. Not, I mean, mind blowing is the way I want to say that, but like it totally changed the way I saw this game. So
Mm-hmm.
you're having conversations with Source moves, you go to the next source. Like mechanically,
Right.
that's what is happening. But you learn so much in this section.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kick us off. One of the things we learn is that Source is the only occupant left in this world, that all the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
keepers have gone. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so to me, shocking, because I was imagining we still had a world that was going to be surrounded by several of these beings.
Right. I also was super surprised. And again, this is where the questions come up because in my head, I would, and this is where maybe the game has addressed this. So please tell me if you also figured it out. But I was like, why did they leave? Like, why did they choose to not stick around? Was there an answer that you found to that
I
or
will give you my read
determined?
on it. If you do, you have a
Yeah.
read. Do you have a perspective?
The perspective that I had was this, because again, in my head, they are tied. Well, there's the literal element of they were escaping, like the stars colliding, their home was going to be destroyed. And in my head, part of it is coming to Earth. They felt that this was not their home. Like this was not going to be some sort of replacement, or it did not satiate that longing that they were yearning for. And they had moved on because there was more, like they're still trying to find their home. The other element is they're attracted to suffering, to this like pain and trauma. And so I'm wondering if their lack, like this idea of maybe the irises, not, which this was the looser theory, but it's like maybe there wasn't enough holding them there to stay in terms of that idea of suffering. And perhaps with the refresh, that there's some movement towards not like sitting within that trauma. Again, that was like
Yeah.
super weak in my opinion in terms of like a narrative explanation. So I still have big questions on the occupants slash keepers and like what their story is.
So I'll give you my read on it, but it requires that we say another thing that we learned during this, which
Yes.
is first, it requires us to, like, the source and the occupants do not consider death a bad thing. That
Mm-hmm.
death is referred to as a transfer.
Mm-hmm.
That so they don't really associate it with any sort of suffering. So if something dies, it's like that's just a transfer. Like that's not. I don't know if it's like electrons or of those beings are still firing somewhere. So like I don't know what that
Mm.
means, but there's something about death is not bad, and that maybe the reason they are called the keepers is because their primary reason for being is to make sure that someone is able to preserve the memories of the planet. And I think the framing that the source uses is
Mm.
even when this sun goes dead, because they've put this like red protective shell around the planet, uh, the memories will preserve, and it is the source who has been collecting these memories and holding on to them. And so the way I read this was
Mm.
the other keepers have gone to the next planet that they are going to, quote, protect by making sure that it stays perfectly preserved. Like I thought, like memory keepers, like I'm holding on to
Mm.
memories. I'm going to preserve and make sure this planet doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, that oh man, and that just kind of sits right back into the like, but if you're preserving something, you can't move forward from it. You are trapped. Like
That's so
like
good.
the inability to move on, and like you are just sitting, like if you are trapped, like this is why we don't have perfect memories. This is why it is good that we forget things, right? Because it allows us to move forward. And so this idea of being trapped with the perfect memory of everything that's happened to past generations, that sounds really horrible, honestly. It's like we should remember things, but not everything and not exactly as it happens. Like we can't feel that pain in our present moment.
Let's add to that, because one of the things that they talk about is all the different ways humans tried to communicate, and that one of them
Mm-hmm.
was the piano, and that the thing that they kept coming back to is discord, and that it seems like humans like discord. When you think about like chord progressions and like musical
Mm-hmm.
theory, it is the discord and dissonance that makes the things, the resolution of chord progressions and
Right.
compositions feel good. If there wasn't discord, it wouldn't feel good at the end. And
Mm-hmm.
the message that the keepers took away from that is that, oh, discord is something these people really value. It's how they communicate, which became a motivation for them to choose Iris as, I think they said the language was like she had a gift for discord. And I thought that
Mm.
was incredible, and also explains why things that we would associate with suffering and pain and things that we would not want to hold on to and sit in, like the deaths of all these children, for example, the keepers are like, wait, I thought y'all like discord. Like what's the
Mm.
deal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh man, talking through this is really helping my understanding because I was reading my notes and I was like, this makes no sense. Like anything I wrote down, none of this makes sense. This is helping. Okay, let's keep going. I like this so much.
We do also get the function, I guess you would say, of each of the familiars in this section. This is very
Yes.
much a like one ring to rule them all and in the darkness bind them moment.
Yes, I also felt that too. Oh my
So the three
gosh.
things that we get is there is one that is a medium to keep everything. So something that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stores memories, perhaps.
Yep.
One that is a bridge to understanding us, the keepers, and one that is a
Mm-hmm.
way for us to understand her,
Yeah.
Iris, in this case. Which I think is really interesting when we think about secretary and kind of how they formulate communion, etc.
Mm-hmm.
what were some of did you have did that shift or color how you perceive the familiars at all as you were thinking about like the keeping, understanding us, understanding her?
I did not even get that far in my thinking because, again, this was the section I shouldn't have played it on a red eye flight. Like, genuinely, I'm looking back and I'm like, that was the worst decision ever. But no, so I would love to hear just any of the thoughts that you had on the three familiars and their relationship with maybe their corresponding
Mhm.
person, the corresponding iris.
So yeah, this is some things that I feel good about some of these ideas and bad about others. So
Hmm.
feel free to press on any of this.
Yeah, yeah.
We know that there's the red familiar, and that is who Almo is communicating with at certain points, and now Secretary
Hmm.
is communicating with. And my perspective is that is them communicating with the keepers. That maybe that's the red one, which also kind of maybe makes
Hmm.
sense if the keepers are red. I don't know.
Yeah.
The one that is for us to understand her, I am torn. To me, that reads as the yellow one. That is maybe Picture Zhao, maybe Zhao Prime. We don't get any answers to that
Hmm.
as far as I could tell from the end of this game.
Hmm.
And then the medium to keep everything that keeps memories made sense that is maybe Secretary. That like uh, that they're the one that communicate or facilitate communion, and so memory is like a core function of that.
Right.
So I don't know. That was kind of like how I interpreted that, but I would, yeah, it's they intentionally, I think, do not explicitly spell that out for us.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me as I'm listening to you talk through it. Yeah, that's, oh man.
So we get to kind of a pretty dramatic moment in this where, but so I guess we
Hmm.
didn't even say this before you go into this liminal space. Secretary says, "I'm going to be different the next time that you see me,"
Yeah.
which kind of gets us to the climax of this moment where
Hmm.
you are going to now merge with the source. And for those of you that are Naruto fans out there, it reminded me very much of like when Naruto realizes that when his shadow clones disappear, he gets all of their experience and learning. And that is how I felt in this scene with like the source is like, "Oh, I'm going to like reabsorb you." And I
Yeah.
think the source is thinking, I will still be like the dominant presence or force here. But I think
Hmm.
what is intuitive, I think it was pretty obvious to us as the audience, probably, that it's like, no, once the source has lived 1,000 years of memories of these irises,
Hmm.
there's no way they can be unchanged. There's no way that you could still believe that death is not something that causes immense suffering. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, you merge, I guess, is kind of the big point here.
Yeah. And then, oh man, there was a quote that I feel like I wrote down. Trying to scan. I typed up my notes, so I'm trying to scan to see if I can find it. Oh, okay, here. So this is one from Watcher in chapter 8, but Watcher says like all change and transformation is violent. And so that really comes to mind, this idea of, because like a bodily takeover and like this change of the source even, there is a, it's not violence in the sense that I think we would traditionally think of a violence, but it is a violence
Yeah.
towards like this other body of being. So just this idea of violence inherent in change, and then maybe building off of that, the idea that not all violence is bad. Like maybe there is a necessitation for this type of violence, for a change to happen. Um,
Well,
yeah.
I'm so glad that you talked about violence, because the way that they visualize the merging for us is
Oh,
Almo
it was
getting stabbed repeatedly. So it's like, let's replay the moment where your
your
person,
your god.
your and your
Yeah.
avatar are going to get stabbed repeatedly. and like, let's replay that and let's see it one more time. And like,
Mm-hmm.
there was something that was so visceral about that it's like, you as the keepers have been so separate from the true suffering and feelings of suffering, and now
Mm-hmm.
we're forcing you to live and relive that over and over again. Was, powerful
Yeah.
stuff.
It's really interesting too, because we haven't talked about I feel like we as players feel a lot of emotion when we play this game. I think the characters within this game have almost an astounding disconnect
Oof.
from the things that happen around and to them, to points where I'm just like, even the voice acting, which I think is incredible. I think it's a really well done, smart decision on their part, or what it feels like to me, of having this really subdued, not monotone, but very like almost flat reading of so much of the lines.
Mm.
And I think that contrasting with this like really viscerally emotional moment is just really cool. It's just really, really well done. Because it made me feel like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I feel like they're feeling something
Mm.
like to their core versus just like surface level feeling something.
Surface level is a great way to call this out, because one of the things that also happens during this sequence with Secretary is Secretary, almost tongue in cheek, starts
Mhm.
talking to the source in like the old school source language, like the way that
Yes.
when we were playing as Watcher or Observer.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I'm getting lost.
Or
The
blue, maybe.
the
I
first
don't know.
person that you're playing
Yeah.
as when you play the game, you learn that there's this kind of code for how the keepers talk, and
Right.
Secretary is kind of jokingly poking fun by using that kind of code speak, and the source is like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. Like, don't talk to me like
Yeah.
that. And it was like, I know that we're on the lookout constantly for like the diaspora signs and themes, and this felt like one to me, that like,
Mm.
oh, you're using this like the proverbial broken way of speaking here, and I don't want to be associated with
Mm.
that anymore, even though it's a part of like who I am and part of my history. um
Oh, interesting. I That did not strike me. Like I didn't think about that when playing, but I love that you brought that up, because I did notice the jokiness of it, where it's like um I think there's a moment, what you were talking about, when Secretary says like, "Oh, like we went into the bodies and they felt familiar. Or we went into the body,"
mhm.
or something like that. And yeah, that's when Source is like, "Knock it off." I love Secretary is so funny to me in this
Yes,
really dry way, but Secretary is just like, "Sorry." And I cracked up so much.
same.
Secretary, like between neighing like a horse, and that sorry, Secretary is comedian of the year to me. I love
Incredible.
Secretary.
Oh man, you'll hear about, yeah, in our interviews with the creators next week, about their use of humor and why that was important.
Hmm.
But we then move into the next kind of big dramatic section of the game, which we learn from the creators, they refer to as the impossible conversations. And
Yes.
oof, anything before we, is like, first of all, like your perspective shifts, right? You are now a first person floating entity. You're kind of in
Hmm.
the hallways of an apartment complex or something, is kind of the vibe for some of them at least. How would you characterize this whole kind of almost finale section of this game?
Oh man. I don't even know where to start. I think it is this culmination of so many different, all of the characters, really. I think most every prominent character has a moment where they show up. um I felt really, you mentioned the other section with the 50 being one of the scarier sections for you, or having that feeling of like a horror game.
Mm.
I felt like this evoked for me the most horror game feeling, um, of the entire game, because of the way that you are walking first person through the hallways. It gave me a very like, I don't know, PT. If anyone's played that demo, it gave me a very PT feel.
Mm.
um, But when you're in these conversations, you know, that's just as you're walking through the hallways, you're looking down, you're looking through the doorways, and you see these bodies, and not all of them will speak, but when you do cross into conversations, they are some of the most, God, every single conversation could have its own podcast, I feel like. But my personal favorite, that I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time on, is the one between Iris and her mother. But what was really cool, I will shout out, like, we get one between Bartender and Knower, who I think are two of my other, maybe not favorite characters, but they're up there. They're definitely in my top 5 sisters. So like, shout out to Bartender fans.
Knower drinks the dark and sinful in this. We are
Yep.
like outside of space and time now. Like, this is
Yeah,
all
everything has
happening
like
in
moved into one
dream
another.
space kind of thing.
Mhm.
So you reference, first of all, I just, so I can get a feel for how you were feeling during this piece. Was this still during your red eye flight? Did you play this? Because I was an emotional wreck, not at 1 a.m. So if it's red eye flight for you and you're playing this, I don't know. I would have been distraught.
I was full on crying on the plane. This was, again, it's already very dreamlike. It's already so outside of space and time. And I feel like flights are very much in that same category. Like, when you're on a plane, time doesn't really mean anything anymore. You're in this tin can where space means not the same things as it does in sort of real life. And so I was in this liminal space in the sky playing this game where I couldn't tell up from down or left from right. And truthfully, the scene in the stairwell between Mother and Iris, that hit me really hard.
Yeah,
in an amazing way. But oh my gosh, just
let's talk about that. Like, I think this is one, like, we can probably reference, if we have enough time, we'll reference like all of them. But this moment where you're on to set the scene for you, what you are seeing is a stairwell from the outside, and on the bottom stairs, set of stairs, you see Iris's mom, whose name is
Clara,
thank you.
Yeah.
And then on top of this, on the next flight up, you see Almo, but it's not Almo, is it? It's Iris. It's like Iris. The conversational styling, the pattern of speech. This is just older Iris before being kind of, I'll use the word corrupted loosely here by the keepers. But she still has all of her memories of being Almo, it would seem. So maybe like, talk about it, Jenny. Like, what was the thing? Like, what was the topic? What were the themes that kind of this evoked for you?
Oh man, it's hard to know where to start. I think one thing that struck me, I guess on a more lighthearted note, was this that mother-daughter relationship that they captured really perfectly, where, at least from my experience, sorry, there's a motorcycle that just drove by, where I think there's a moment where Iris is like, hey, I need to ask for some advice. And the dialogue wasn't even dialogue. It was parentheses, Mother is softly triumphant. And that like moment of, and that there's this like give and take and tension, but love with this mother-daughter relationship. Oh, that I felt was so perfectly captured.
It was
nice.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and they started talking about motherhood, and this idea of family and responsibility for your family. But before we get into that, don't want to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say it reminded me of in real life, maybe when a parent has children that like get to like age 3, age 5, they're in school. And then that parent goes to talk to their parent and is like, how did you do it? How did you deal with me as a kid? Like, what was that? How did you have that patience? Like, that very real life experience that I think probably happens to most parents who still have a relationship with their parents. And when we talk about like all the grounding moments, the way you just framed that for me was perfect, Jenny. I was like, yes, it felt so like real, actual. This happens.
Yeah, like I feel like some of the quips, like in the midst of this really heavy conversation that they're having, this really like grounded conversation, there are these quips that brought me back to like, this is a mother-daughter, like this is a real, like this is the kind of quip that I would make, or this is probably what my mom would say, maybe just to rub it in a little bit.
Just a little bit.
And so I thought that was really beautifully done. But yeah, they talk about the struggles where the mom even says like, you're not asking me the right question, and Iris is like, well, what do I want to know? And she says, and I wrote this down because I thought it was how did I balance the work hours with the thanklessness of parenting at the same time as the insomnia and the severe post-traumatic paranoia? And Iris is like, yeah.
Oh yeah, that is my question.
So about that. But I think what also really struck me was the moment when the mom was when she says, you know, I'm so sorry, I never actually went back, I just kept moving forward. And the mom, all she said, she was like, good girl. Like, oh, that moment, I was
that
like, so good. Oh, which I'm like getting choked up thinking about it because it's so freaking good.
Yeah,
like this idea, I think, of, we see youngest like searching for that affirmation from a parent, and then like Iris, even in this like non-time, non-space place, getting that from her mom. I think this like healing begins. Oh, it's so good.
We're both in tears now. Yes.
Yeah. I can't even talk about it because it's just so beautiful.
While we're on the frame of extremely emotional moments, her answer to that question was your dad, and how like he grounded her and she grounded him, and like we know that they were dealing with the stress and trauma of the HK protests, and like so much of this game, like not so much, like so several times in this game we get to see like right after the dad was like abused by the police there, and how the mom found them and how they met, and it's always told in these cheery stories. And so we know that that is a critical emotional anchor for these two, and to have her answer be your dad was just
it's such, I think what struck me about this writing was how honest it felt. Like, and it's not to say that other writing isn't honest, but I think this came from a place where I was like, I feel it, like in a way that, oh, it's just so good.
I am gonna have to just like, sorry, take us back because we just went straight to this conversation, which was like one of the middle ones, but the one right before this is the dad in a beach recliner laying in the middle of the city talking to seemingly the city. So to go from that to this, and she's like, it's your father, was just like, y'all, I only have so much Kleenex in this house. And
honestly, oh my gosh, thank you for bringing up that, because, you know, we recall from the video that her dad recorded, he just wanted to like die, be buried, have his ashes return to Hong Kong. And so in this place where space, time, everything has just kind of melded into one another, the fact that he found somehow Hong Kong again and was just chilling, relaxing, like as if he was at a beach. I want to also highlight, this is a really, what I loved is that his dialogue was entirely in, I'm not sure if I don't know if it's like Mandarin or Cantonese. I don't speak Chinese, but it's entirely in Chinese, essentially. And I thought that was also really beautiful because he primarily, like, he would speak occasionally some Chinese, but primarily spoke in English, especially to Iris. And it was really cool to see him like fully be at home and for him have found himself where he needed to be.
It
But it
felt
was also
really,
heartbreaking.
yes, it was heartbreaking, but it felt healing in a way that, like,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that almost everyone that we are seeing in these impossible conversations are irises. And then we see that the mom is also there somehow in this
Yeah.
liminal space. The dad is there somehow in this liminal space. It just makes me feel like there was some connection to the keepers and these two, maybe beyond what we get to see through the perspectives that we get to see.
Right. Well, and I think it just speaks to the idea of how we inherit our histories, so not just the trauma,
Oof.
because I think we talk about that the most, but we inherit even like the legacy of mom and dad, standing up for what they believe in. And so I think this idea of not just inheriting the bad but inheriting the good, in everyone that has come before you is really important. But yeah, these conversations are just something else. They were incredibly healing for me to read and listen to, I guess, because they were voice acted.
And like, it, before I talk about any of the other conversations we get to see, you are forced to slow down in this moment.
Mhm.
They rush you with a 5-minute timer for your climb. I was speeding because you can make yourself sprint as secretary when you're going to from
Mhm.
source to source. In this section, the camera POV that you're rocking is intentionally slowed down like to molasses. You
Yes.
can't just hop from one impossible conversation to the next. You are forced to sit there and contemplate the experience you just had and maybe have a bit of anxiety about the conversation you're about to walk into.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you called that out because it does force you, like the game is telling you, you have to think about like what else are you going to think about as you walk to the next conversation. You're either thinking about what may come and you're probably a little anxious about it, wondering what's going to happen, or you're still reeling from the conversation that you just experienced. Um,
Should we kind of
yeah.
rattle off some of the other big moments in these conversations? Just there were apparently what we learned is there were a lot of these, and they
Hmm.
had to majorly cut back so that there were only I think 5.
Hmm.
So I do want to like give flowers to each of these because they were such important points of resolution in this story.
Yeah, I mean, we went over my favorite. I'm curious, did you have a favorite as well, or another one that stood out?
Oh, that was the Almo one was my favorite. It was just like
Hmm.
it just felt it was the most important scene of the game, I think, for me.
Hmm.
Even more important than the resolution of the whole story that we're about to experience. But some of the other ones, Healer and BBF are reflecting on taking a life and how BBF was
Hmm.
really uncomfortable with that. And ultimately, I think BBF kills herself.
Hmm.
Which to have it be those two sisters having that conversation, knowing how both of them were trying so hard to move towards like preserving life, that was incredible.
Hmm.
I found it actually, it's in this section that we learned that it was that Almo took the older sisters to the other side, uh,
Hmm.
and that the principal was just sending them like these clones to the other side as evidence, like, look, I'm doing good, like
Hmm.
these, look at how good I'm doing, like you took the original sisters with you, they didn't die of the disease like we thought. And it's like this kind of be proud of me, like I've done
Hmm.
this thing for you, I'm cloning these, like these good clones for you. That was gutting.
Hmm.
I think the one that hurt the most was Fixer and Watcher, who don't talk. They
Yeah.
are just in silence. And
Hmm.
I wanted there to be a moment of healing so bad for them.
Yeah.
But there's something about and I think we hear about this in the resolution of the game, that there are some wounds that like you can't get over, and some things that are maybe unforgivable. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's something about that between this relationship that felt thematically very important to me.
Yeah. There is also a conversation between Principal and Purple Sister, the original Purple Sister, not Nowhere as we know. Um, and this was another moment where, again, we get to see Principal really grapple with this loneliness and this fact that she had been left really to fend for herself. She talks about, did your family ever turn their backs on you? Did your love, the love of your life, ever leave you? And Purple Sister asks a question that also stuck with me, that I wrote down, and that's, how do we move forward without forgiveness? Because Principal does not let things go. Principal will hold on to any slight, any wrong, and just kind of keep it with her as fodder for moving what I think she believes is moving forward, but it is not. And Purple Sister asked that question, and I wrote it down because I was like, oh man, feel like this is going to be a big one later. And it ended up being a big one later.
I can't believe you called that out and I totally missed it. Like, she is the pinnacle of status quo. Like, even her desire to initially clone Zhao and it going so poorly was like a desire to call back to the way things were, rather than moving forward. And I'm so glad you said that. I totally missed that in my thinking here. So great point.
Ooh, yeah. So I think those were the conversations that
Yeah.
we got. And after the stairwell is the final one, which is, we started with that one, but that is the closer conversation.
Red to
And
blue.
red to blue. And as Iris basically is done talking with her mom, she gets up and is able to finally walk up the stairs. The light, we fade to white, and we enter into a very familiar space, although you may not recall that it's a familiar one. This is where we start the game. I am pretty sure,
Oh,
because I
Jenny.
just restarted the game again. I'm moving into my second playthrough. I'm trying to get through it before the hangout so I can have like my thoughts hopefully more gathered. But yeah, we see this
You're right.
very, if not the exact same scene, a very, very similar one at the beginning of the game. So this is a full circle moment right here.
And the thing that we're seeing in this kind of lit up space that's surrounded by more liminal darkness is the keeper's body, the source's body, but with Secretary's head, which I thought was really poignant. They talked about how the keepers were trying to emulate the bodies of people, and I think the fact that keep having Secretary as the head, where we do our thinking, where we do our processing, was just a really great and relatively subtle nod, I thought, to that moment in the game. So we get to this point, and I think like I'll just kind of fast forward through like the mechanics of what's happening here. Is you get to now make your ask of the source, and they're gonna give you this request, and they are going to leave your planet. Secretary is going to grant this kind of wish and then leave. And the mechanics of the game are, in this liminal space, every faction is standing under a light post, and you're going to go through, talk to them, hear about kind of in it from like almost a meta narrative perspective. What are their objectives? What might they do in the future? And what motivated them? And you are going to decide if you're going to carry them into the future by leaving the light on, or leave them behind in the past by turning the light off. And after you go through and like talk to each one and make your decisions, you tell the source you're good to go, and it moves you into the epilogue where you see the outcome of your decision. So like mechanically, that's the end of the game. There's the big moment. But the process of doing this was so I used the word when we were talking with the creators of this game. I was like, this is one of those moments in a game that made me think about all games. Like, you are God in this moment in a way that you're kind of a god in most video games. You're choosing who lives and who dies or whatever, but they force you to really think about the consequences of playing that role and what that has to do with a future that you get to co-create as a part of this game. So what were some of the, like, what stood out to you about this? What were some of the how did you, I guess here's the real question, how did you approach the ending?
Oh man, it was hard. I think one thing that was very apparent to me, and I don't know, I would love to hear if it was apparent to you. I knew that you couldn't, like, that maybe technically, like mechanically, we could carry everyone to the end. But I was like, fundamentally, I know that not all of these factions and ideas can coexist. So I knew that I would have to let something go. And what I also was thinking about, again, just thinking about the element of choice and the idea of action versus inaction, and how if we are to let go, specifically for me, the red guards were the ones where I was like, we cannot take the red guards into the future with us. That is an absolute no for me. It requires the active act of choosing to, like, definitely saying we don't want this with us. And that is why we don't carry them, versus this ambiguous, like, they can still exist, but I guess we'll just not let them take over. You know, it's like that can't happen. Like, that's not how, if you want, I guess, a successful future, in my opinion, you have to make the choice definitively. And so that for me was the process. I knew the red guards, or I keep calling them the red guards. They're not the red guards. Technically,
Sure.
the red shells, in my head, they're synonymous with the red guards. But the red shells were a no. I can't remember, and I didn't write this down, and I wish I did. I don't think I took Mauve with me either, but I did forgive Principal, and I did bring Principal with me. So,
Wow, it
yeah.
let you do that.
Yes, I think in theory you can take everyone.
You cannot.
Oh, you cannot. Okay, so you
like,
don't.
Okay, let me phrase it. You can take them, but in the epilogue, when you see what happens, at least in one of the endings, it forces you to go back to the lights and do it again.
Oh, snap. Okay, so it doesn't let you finish the game.
I am shocked that
Wow.
they let you take Principal. I am shocked.
The whole thing about forgiveness, though, it's like you got to be able to forgive something
So
to move forward.
what's interesting is
Principle.
I took the inverse approach. I took Mauve with me and left Principal behind. My theory of action was
Interesting.
all fascists and all people who enable fascism gotta go. And so it wasn't even like, I didn't even feel guilty about it. Principal, no.
Yeah.
Knower,
Yeah.
no. Red Guard, no. Religious fanatics, no. And Mauve was the one that I was like, she was more of like an agent of chaos than someone that enabled fascism from my perspective. Like, she didn't like the system. It was almost like a version of anarchy. And I guess here's my read, because I saved Mauve and then I went and saw the ending, and then it made me play it again. And I will say, in defense of the creators, Secretary Source asked me if I was sure. It was like, are you sure you want to take Mauve? She did some pretty fucked up shit. And I was like, I gotta bring her with. She's an agent of change, and like, there's gonna be conflict in my future, but like, she called into question all of the systems which needed to happen. And in the end,
could you argue that, like, Chris and the miscellaneous were like, what is the difference for you in making that choice, like bringing Mauve and like the miscellaneous, for example?
It was the same for me. Like, they were both people who were trying to disrupt the system itself. And so I was like, I want people that are interested in getting out of the status quo and not reinforcing fascism.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but what happens in the epilogue, if you save Mauve after the warning, is literally you get a vision of yourself falling to the ground after getting shot by Mauve and some new sisters in red, apparently. And then it takes you right
Mm.
back to the lights again, and you have to replay that section.
Yeah, because I think if I'm remembering correctly, again, I don't know why. I think at this point I was just so in it, my notes kind of just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I'm remembering correctly, I didn't bring Mauve because there was an element to her dialogue that was about like at any cost, she was willing to do like be the agent of change. And for me, I think that's what gave me pause was like the any cost element. Um but yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't bring Mauve. I know for sure because I debated it for a long time, but I did bring principal slash youngest with me. Um and the dialogue that we got was because secretary was like, "Are you sure?" And the response was about how principal slash youngest is just tired and like should be afforded this opportunity to just stop running. um
Wow.
I think is what was said.
So
And I
you said
oh
this, we
yeah.
didn't actually say this yet, but like before or as you are choosing your ending,
Mm-hmm.
you get a meta analysis of what your choices imply. So,
Mm-hmm.
because I left Prince behind, the choice that implied was you've chosen a world where there are some things that are beyond forgiveness.
Yes.
And so I was like, yeah, I believe that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was fine with it. And so it's it's so interesting.
That's super
I'm gonna agree
interesting.
with your take though. This like ends justify the means, like will do anything issue with Mauve, because I think like after it forced me to replay it and I had to leave Mauve behind, it
Yeah.
almost was like a she's the Joker in the Dark Knight, like some men just want to watch the
Mm.
world burn situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe at some point she was redeemable, but maybe once she killed BBF or shot BBF, she wasn't anymore. She had crossed the line to like
Mm-hmm.
someone that is like a true agent of chaos and would prevent your society from being having a
Mm.
healthy future.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I did keep like the old sort of the old sisters in the memories, you know, that the represented like the knowledge of the past. Um I did choose see and I kept this in my first playthrough. I did choose to keep the sisters of the faith as well. Partially because they did say they were like we just want to believe as we do without infringing on others. And then, of course, the warning that you get is, you know, this faith can become essentially corrupt. It can start to bleed out and like take on a life of its own that can, you know, be like wildfire, lose control. But I was like, you know what? If I'm bringing Chris and I'm bringing some of these other sisters, I feel like that's a risk I'm willing to take.
That's
For
so interesting. I think that's
yeah.
my personal religious baggage coming through, that I don't believe there's something
Hmm.
redeemable about that. But I totally understand the desire for it. And
Hmm.
um in many ways I would say that the faith in Almo is just as legitimate as most faith systems we have in the world today. So yeah. So we get to this like kind of epilogue moment, and I'd love to hear
Hmm.
about the future that you created, because it is different from mine based on who you brought forward. So can you talk a bit about what you saw after you chose to bring them along?
Yeah. So when I ended, basically after you make your decision, you flash back to the present time and everyone is still falling. And so all of this is happening in the span of you like falling through the sky. And I got, oh my gosh, let me look on Steam just to see what it was called. Cause I got Epilogue and it was like Epilogue with parentheses red, I think it was called. Um, Ugh, I hate having Steam Deck being the place where I play because I think the achievements don't always tie. Like I don't always get the sync.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it says I've only completed chapter 5 according to the achievements, which is not true. Um I believe I got the red epilogue. And you see you're in the orchard in first person view, and
Mm-hmm.
you're walking around. Did you get this too?
So far, yep.
Okay. And you go to the center of the orchard, and there's a figure. And this figure looks very futuristic, like very much like a robot, with sort of these like cord like sort of veins, or I don't know, like tendrils coming out of her.
This is not who I
Um,
saw.
oh my gosh. Okay.
I
So
saw
I'll pause
Blue
there.
in mine. Blue
Oh
was the
my
person in the middle of the orchard that
gosh.
I was talking to. So okay,
Oh
cool.
my gosh.
Keep
Okay,
going.
so
Keep
you
going.
definitely, it sounds like you got the better ending. um so you you talk to this person, and it's like future principal, like this other principal, or the same principal. I don't know. I assumed it was maybe the same, but it's like many, many years in the future.
Yeah.
And you talk to her, and she basically tells you to go around and explore the orchard. And you realize, because you speak back, you are a Zhao.
Yes.
I don't know
Yes.
if you're Zhao Prime or a different Zhao, but you are
You're a
a
Zhao
Zhao.
for sure.
And you go to the different epitaphs of the sisters, and you read them aloud, and you sort of pay them your respects. So does that structure at
Yep,
least?
structure's the same.
Okay.
You go into the like little light sticks, and each one kind of has something there. I will say,
Yes.
Blue says she returns every year for this, so this is, I think, your birthday again.
Yes. Okay. Principal says that as well. Okay. So I think, I wonder, oh, I wish I screenshot like every single epitaph so we could compare, because I wonder if the sort of remains and the memorialization of each sister is a little different depending on
Oh,
what ending you
what
get.
if it is?
I
Like,
bet you it
what if
is.
your red ending is like we rewrote what these sisters had to say? Because for mine, like the only light sticks I think were there were the light sticks of like the OG function sisters, maybe. I'm not
Oh,
sure about
man.
that now that I might have just stopped taking notes, but I have light sticks of the remains of the OG sisters was my note here.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not,
Yeah,
but
we have the OG sisters. I believe Blue was also there. So Blue did not survive into this future that I had picked. Um, oh man,
I feel
I
like we need to ask
sincerely wish.
we need to email the team and be like, hey, just like real quick,
I mean, I'm
is
sure
the
there's got
information
to
on the
be
light
stuff
sticks
online.
different than the like with your endings? Because like I cannot imagine if you're talking to a future principal and you got the quote red ending
Right.
and the
I
way
am
she's
at, well,
always
because,
changing history, like
well, and that's the thing, because I went back and played and picked a different ending. Um, but it wasn't the Blue ending either. So there's like definitely more than two endings in this game. So
okay.
now I'm like, I need to go and investigate a bit more. But that is one of the things that was apparent to me. For example, there, one of the epitaphs, I think it was Blue, was like, here lies like the terrorist Blue, for example. And I think so. I think it does change, because I can't imagine, like,
It
well,
would,
A, Blue
yeah.
wouldn't have that even. So, oh man, now I'm like very curious to see
Wow,
what your ending
you chose the
was.
fascist ending. Wow, good job, Jenny.
um, I believe in forgiveness. I wanted to forgive youngest.
It reminded me
Um,
of like honestly what I was put in mind of was, and I know don't come at me, philosophy bros. Like I'm gonna summarize the classic Karl Popper philosophy, which is like in a progressive society, the only thing you cannot tolerate is
right,
intolerance. And
right.
that like that's what I came back to as I was dealing with this kind of
Mm,
trolley problem of who do you bring with you
mm-hmm.
into the future is like I cannot tolerate
Yeah.
fascism and those that
No, for
enable it. And so
sure.
I think that was kind of what I hit for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes total sense. I couldn't leave youngest alone again. It would just made me so sad. But then after you're done
Yes, tell
exploring,
me what happens.
um, we then go up to the surface,
Mm-hmm.
and it's blue skies, it's beautiful, and we see the other sisters there on the surface, all like living without their masks. what seems to be relatively happily.
Interesting. Yes. So
Did you
they
have
were the
that as
same for me, but
well?
they were kind of like off in the distance. Like I didn't see them very closely, but they definitely like no masks. They were
Yeah.
okay.
Is
Anything else
that what
happen for
happened?
you?
Let me look through my notes. I didn't write anything else down,
How did you
so
get
I
to the
don't remember.
surface? Did you
Oh
call a ship?
gosh, I do not remember.
So this way you would probably remember this if it happened for you. Um, when you are done and you're ready to leave with Blue in my story, you call a ship.
Hmm.
The ship is called the Ephemeral. Um, and the person that comes to pick you up and help you leave has a male voice.
Oh, interesting. Is it a Johnson?
I didn't
Is it
recognize it.
secretary?
No, I don't think it was secretary. It was like definitely like a human male, but it could have been a Johnson. I don't know. Like now the bodies
Yeah,
are there, so they certainly could have cloned any of the 50 for part of this. But male voice taking you away to the surface.
interesting. Yeah, because I think, yeah, I don't know how we got up to the surface. And now I'm like, maybe I need to reselect that ending again because we came up and it was miscellaneous who um it was, I think, a miscellaneous because I don't think it was Blue because Blue was gone. But we do see Almo on the
There's an
beach.
Almo on the beach for me too.
Yeah. Oh gosh. But did you see a miscellaneous or
I don't
no?
remember. I didn't take that note if I did.
Okay. Because I'm trying to think of which miscellaneous it could be if for me Blue was now perished. Did Blue say anything else?
No. Like you're talking with them at the end. They're like, "Are you ready to go?" Like that kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
nothing else that was really like noteworthy for me. Just, I mean, they're alive.
Oh, that's so interesting. I need to go back. I'm gonna try and see if I can find like a YouTube playthrough and this like
Ending
speed through the
epilogue
endings.
comparison or
Yeah, because
something.
or maybe actually because they are chapter selects. So maybe I could just go through and like speed run all of the different endings because I'm really curious now to see how many different. So we know of at least, I guess, two and a half, three, because Mauve just killing you. That's one.
Restart.
You have Epilogue Blue. You have Epilogue Red. So yeah, I'm very curious to see if there's anything else. That's really interesting. Ugh. But yeah, it ends with like history is written by the victors, essentially. Um,
Wow.
whoever lives to see the next day and write the story gets to decide what continues.
Jenny, I'm so sorry. I feel like
I thought that like I was genuinely happy with my playthrough and my ending. Again, I feel like I could not live in a world where like I don't know. I just obviously do not want a fascist government, but I think youngest I felt for her and I would have been really sad if I did not give her an opportunity to be forgiven.
I mean, yeah, I totally get that. That was my motivation for Mauve, to be honest. Was like she did some really messed up stuff. Like she was there while Watcher was getting her eyes plucked out. So like, or Observer or whatever.
Mhm.
So like, I totally get the drive towards forgiveness with the characters. The thing, honestly, as you're doing this kind of next layer of research, I am very curious about whether you had a male voice pick you up or not. Because
Mhm.
that to me is a huge indicator of if they are trying to move society forward or if the principal really did just kind of take over and reinforce the same
Yeah.
hierarchy of sisters that existed when she was in charge down below.
Man, I'm trying to remember just for like order of operations if I saved nowhere or not. And I cannot remember if I saved nowhere or
I
not
definitely did
for the
not.
life of me.
She was she was booted.
Yeah, I cannot remember. I Nowhere was the other one I was torn with, and I know for sure I did forgive youngest principal, but I don't remember which way I moved with nowhere because I remember wanting to so badly, but also felt like she was similar to me as Mauve, where her movement towards anything that would benefit her felt like it would be more disingenuous and not serve the society I was hoping to make as much as I was wanting to save her. So I know I screenshot it and it's just not uploaded on Steam. So I'm going to have to check, and I'll have to like just upload what I did for my first one.
Y'all, the community conversation for this month is gonna be a wild ride. So you put it on your calendars. You gotta come and talk with us about this game. I am so curious to hear about other people's experiences.
Yes. And for folks who have no idea where that's happening, you can go to geeksandgrounds.com. That's got the link to the Discord page as well as everything else you need to just know about Geeks and Grounds. But the link to the Discord is there. If you go into Discord, make sure you click on the Geeks and Grounds role. That will open up the set of channels that we use to talk about this game and any others that we play. And yeah, thanks again for listening. I'm super excited. That'll be Saturday, just because we didn't give any dates. Saturday, June 29th at 3 p.m. Pacific time in Discord. We just hang out for about an hour, chat theories, any lingering questions from the games, gush about our favorite moments, and yeah, call it a month. We are also releasing our discussion with Sunset Visitor next week. Joel teased some of the stuff in the conversation here today, so if you're enticed by that, definitely make sure you listen next week. It's releasing on July 2nd, and we are starting our next game, Citizen Sleeper, on the week of July 3rd. So if you haven't picked it up yet, you still have time. July 3rd is the first week that we are playing Citizen Sleeper, and the first podcast for Citizen Sleeper is coming out on July 9th.
My goodness.
Busy.
I cannot have. I could not stop gushing about this game with the creators. It is, to Jenny's point, this is my game of the year at this point. I don't know what it's going to take to unseat it. I cannot imagine what it would take, because I haven't been this engaged in any form of storytelling in probably years. I was just so grateful for this game experience and story. Thank you so much for joining us at Geeks and Grounds. It was an absolute honor to have you be a part of our community and chat for this month. Next time, make sure you have a male clone that can fly your ship to the future that you desire. Bye!
Bye, everyone.